I associated the pain cave with negativity always. Like, don't arrive to the pain cave. If you arrive at the pain cave, like, just try to ride it out, like survive those moments.
Welcome to the Shaw Strength Podcast, and today I have got a very exciting guest, Courtney Dauwalter, and Courtney is training to be the next world's strongest woman. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's literally, and I'm not even kidding. I asked for this intro, and I said, "Hey, what would be a good way to introduce you?" And that is, without hesitation, what Courtney said to me. Right. Yeah. So as soon as the world's strongest woman includes some type of ultra long distance running
and zero lifting.
Yeah. I mean, just the lifting goes away, and that is what happens. Like it's you're a shoo-in, literally. How are you doing today?
I'm great. It's so cool to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm very, very excited to kind of hear your story. So, I think we should introduce just kind of what you do and then how you got into it, right? I think this is fascinating, or will be fascinating for people to hear, right? Because I think that what I'm most interested in, I'm getting ahead, but is like the mental capacity to do what you do because all the races you do are insane, right? So just doing a little bit of research that I did on you and your career and what you have done and what you've accomplished. Like, just talk about kind of what you do and then how you got into it. Like, some of your background, any of that.
Yeah. So I run ultramarathons, and an ultramarathon is any distance over a standard marathon.
Okay.
So anything over 26.2 miles would be classified as a ultra. But the standard distances are like 50K, so 31 miles, 50 miles, 100K, which is 62 miles, and 100 miles. And oftentimes these races are on trails, a lot of times in the mountains or, through canyons or the desert or wild terrain. And your goal is, like any foot race, to get to the finish line as quickly as you can. You'll carry a lot of your gear with you in these vests that we wear. And along the way, there will be aid stations. So spots that have a ton of snack options. You can refill your water in your vest and then carry on. But it's a really growing sport right now, and super cool to be a part of it. I got into it because I was curious if I could ever finish a road marathon. I thought, this was probably 15 years ago, I thought road marathons sound insane. Like, how do people run 26 miles? I don't get it. And then figured I might as well test myself and see, can I be that person? And when I finished that road marathon, I was completely destroyed. My legs felt like they were going to shatter under me. Like, it was so hard, but it made me think, I thought this distance was impossible, and then I just crossed that finish line. So what other distances are out there that feel impossible that I could try? And that led me to this ultra running world that I had no idea existed before that.
I mean, and most people, I feel like most people, right, understand what a marathon is, right? So, and then you have the half marathon that you go down. You're talking about going up, but most people go down. Well, I'll do, a 5K or something like that, or I'm gonna shoot to do a half marathon, or like eventually I might be able to do a marathon. That's like the mountaintop, right? Like, that's like most people, I would say, like society in general, is like, oh, are you running a marathon? Holy cow.
Yeah.
And you're quite literally, the marathon is almost a warm up, for some of these races. Like, if you're talking about a 100-mile race, that's the first quarter of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, which is, I mean, it's hard to comprehend mentally, but setting that goal for yourself, I mean, is growing up, what did you do any other sports, or was there anything else that you were into, or like, where did that kind of foundation start?
Yeah, I grew up in Minnesota in a really active family. I have two brothers. So we were always doing all the sports all of the time. And then I got really into cross-country running and track, and then cross country skiing in the winter. Fell in love with the feeling of running, that feeling of racing, but also the like joy it gave me to have these teammates that I would, socialize with on runs, and we'd all work together to get, towards this end goal. And that like established this, like running to me was always fun. Then it was never the punishment. A lot of people grow up where running is the punishment for their sport or whatever. And so they never like quite get the joy factor out of it. But I was really lucky because the environment that I was learning to run and race in was just filled with joy. And that association was always strongly tied for me. So after that, I just kept running because of how it made me feel. So before school or before work or, whatever phase I was in my life, I would still run in the mornings to start the day because it mentally and physically felt like that was how I got my best version of myself going for a day. It's like start the day with a run, and then the systems are all green lights and we can, function better for the day.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, right? Because the only way I think when I'm listening to you, I'm trying to think like, okay, how can I associate with what you're thinking, right? And what you're saying. And for one period for me, right? Like I was very into basketball, right? The basketball was my world, especially in high school. Like everything was focused on that. And then, I went on to play in college. And, back then, I think, a lot of the training and the running for basketball, like you said, was punishment. Right? It was like, oh, well, get on the line, right? Like you messed up and hey, the team, like you're not doing what you need to do. And that was the word you heard, get on the line and here you go, right?
Yeah.
And so you're running suicides or whatever. But I was like, okay, I was bound and determined to get into the best shape I could going into college. So one of the things that I implemented, and it was every single day, first thing in the morning, right? So I had my shoes and socks right there, just literally sit up out of bed, put those on, and go to the restroom and then out the door, right? And there was like out of my parents' house at that point, but I could run down this dirt road, and then I would go over, and there was like past this cemetery and kind of out on a dirt road, but it was from my parents' door out there and back was like about 6 miles, right? So I was like, okay, but that was how I started the day. It was just what I did. And I could do that pretty easily, right? Like it was like one of these things, and it doesn't get you in. I figured out very quickly, even though, I thought like, oh, I'm in amazing shape, right? The longer distance running doesn't get you in shape for basketball because it was like sprint down the court, play, sprint back down. Because I went in the summer to play with some of my teammates, my new teammates, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be in great shape. Like, you guys better watch out. Nope, not so much, right? Like, so it was the distance I could go for a long time, but it was like the sprint, move and then come back. But the people talk about kind of like the runner's high, right? Like where you have this kind of mental, disconnect, you feel very good. And I think that, 6 mile run for me, 5 to 6 miles, whatever it was, that I got that, right? Like, so you're talking about like starting your day, mental clarity. I could think because I was by myself. So I kind of got in my own head, and it was a very interesting, thing to do, right? Like, and it was kind of like, I just got to be by myself, and you kind of just hear different sounds, and it's a kind of euphoric thing to do, right? So like that's the only way that I can even comprehend that. And now, for me, lifting is that, right? So like I like to get up and train, and I've been doing a lot more in the morning with that, where it's like, okay, just go and do it. But I have that kind of same type of feeling, right? So it's interesting that you're associating it with a positive thing. That's such a cool thing, because a lot of times you're exactly right. A lot of sports, that is your punishment. Yeah. So it's like, well, I don't really want to run. I want to avoid that at all costs, versus like, hey, you're like, hey, this is fun, right? Like I'm getting this positive feedback loop from it.
Yeah.
So you associate such a positive thing with running, which is awesome, right? Yeah. So like, that's my only, I'm hijacking it here to tell my running story, right?
No,
like,
I love it.
Yeah, but it's you're the 6 miles, like, okay, Brian, that's cool.
No.
But you're such a, yeah.
So that's the thing is like,
You can say it. I don't mind it
No.
all. I don't mind it all.
I mean, we're going to talk about these races that I do right now by choice. Like I'm choosing to run these 100-mile distances, but it's the same. Like it didn't happen overnight. You know, it was this really slow building process of like, you know, establishing kind of that base work of, you know, just being able to do the 5-mile loop run around the block or whatever, you know, and it's all the same. It's just different. It's just a different distance. But if someone was, you know, trying to get to their first, like 5-mile run, we're talking about the same feelings that I'm having in the distances I'm trying now, you know?
Absolutely.
It's just like, I've taken it a little extreme.
Well, and this is, to say that, that's kind of a little bit of an understatement, just a touch, you know. I mean, it's, so you're coming through, so you were very active younger, right? Like it sounds like you were doing a lot of different things, but you gravitated towards like the cross country.
I did,
running.
yeah.
And it, you know, you got something out of that. And I feel like, so it never really stopped. Did you ever go away from it? Like after high school, or was it like, hey, I mean, were you working out, or was it always like, I just enjoy running, so I'm done with school, and I'm assuming then done with cross country? Did you go immediately into races you were trying to enter, like out of high school, or did you run in college or anything?
In college, I cross country skied.
Okay.
So I still got to race.
Did you enjoy the ski more than the running at that point?
Yeah, I loved it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I still love
that's
it.
interesting.
Yeah, that was really cool. And cross country skiing is interesting because the winter months are only so many where the snow is actually there. So a lot of our season was training by, you know, running or getting on the trails, you know, using poles out there. So it was kind of like the perfect intro to what I do now, which is out on the trails. We use poles sometimes. Like it all kind of fed into that.
Interesting. What college did you go to?
The University of Denver.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And they have a cross country skiing team.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool. How many people were on the team?
What do we have? Maybe like 20 or something.
Were you the best?
It was guys and girls.
I know. Were you the best?
No.
You were not.
No.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Were you competing to be the best?
I mean, I was trying my hardest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason I'm asking that question is I just wonder if like that fire, right, to do these things, what was in you, and like, I mean, you're going there to be competitive. I mean, is competitiveness, is the feeling you're getting more, is that the feedback loop you like? You're really like challenging yourself, or is it like I'm outwardly competing against others and I like that? Like where do you go in your head?
Now it's all internal and just curiosity for what's possible. These ultra distances really put you through the test to get to those finish lines. And I just
imagine.
keep wondering physically and mentally, like, what are humans capable of in this specific area?
Okay.
But originally, you know, in high school and college, you're told that results are, you know, how you determine if you were good at something or not. And so probably back then it was more like, what was my place in this race? How did I do compared to everyone else? And the ultra running world is quite a bit different, where if you finish a race, everyone's just psyched you finished, you know?
Because it's
like,
such a challenge.
Such a challenge. And you get to that finish line and people just want to swap stories about like what it took to get there. What problems did you encounter? You know, how was it for you? Tell me about the night, whatever. And it's like just adventure stories instead of like, what was your time or what place did you get? It feels way less relevant in this sport.
Do you feel like that is because it's so extreme? I mean, like, was there a point where that shifted for you, where it's like, okay, you're obviously in college, you're competing on a team, and you know, trying to be the best you possibly can be with that, but it's competitive, right? So it's a competitive setting, and then after you get out of college, like once you kind of went past maybe like the marathon length, you got to these like other levels, because I mean, you're obviously very successful with what you're doing, right? Like when is the last time that you didn't win?
I don't know.
right? That here, listen. The answer is I don't know, right? Because it was so long ago that you can't even remember. And the point I'm trying to make with that is, okay, like, are you in such a class of your own right now where you have to challenge yourself, right? You have to raise the bar for yourself. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, if you get to this spot where nobody, or it's been a long time for sure, right? Like, I don't know, can you even say like 3 years, 4 years or more where you've actually like be in a race?
I don't know, but I do think like one of the cool aspects of the sport and why it feels more like you're racing against yourself and against the course and against the day is at 100-mile start line. I know it's going to take me, over 24 hours maybe to get to that finish line. And it's like, you can't race another person because who knows what their 24 hours is going to look like. You have to race yourself and like make sure you're taking advantage of every step out on that trail and giving it everything you have for all 24 of those hours, whatever that looks like. Sometimes everything you have is like puking in the bushes, and sometimes it's, cruising along, moving pretty quickly on the trails. Like, everything you have fluctuates so much because there's so much time. So it's like kind of this little roller coaster that you're buckling into at the start line, and you got to ride the highs, you ride out the lows, and you don't know what your competitor's roller coaster looks like.
Sure.
They might be on a high while you're in a low, and so then, you're not very close together.
Yeah.
But you could come back because there's just so much time. 24 hours is...
Yeah, I mean, comparatively speaking, right? So you're like, with what I did with strongman, for example, like there's not even close to that amount of time on the clock, right? Like, you have a time limit. A lot of times it's 60 seconds, 75 seconds. So, for example, like, let's just say a truck pull, right? That's very strenuous. Like a really hard truck pull is something that I really liked, right? Because mentally you have to go to a different spot when you're standing there on the start line. You got the harness on, got the rope in front of you, getting loaded up, and you know what it's going to take to do this, right? So it's going to take everything inside of you, your whole body, everything. Everything's going to be burning. Everything is going to be taxed mentally. Your brain, that voice is going to say like, man, this really hurts. You should ease off a little bit, right? Like, and it's being able to dig into that even harder when that happens, right? Yeah. So like you're going into the spot where, and I always love that because I felt like I could live there for longer than anybody, right? So I knew how bad it was going to suck, and it's like, all right, just bring it on. I want it to be even worse, and that's why it's, that's why I'm saying a heavy, hard truck, like super hard, where it's like, I don't even know if everybody can finish type of truck pull, right? Like, that's what I loved. And if it was too easy, it was a big letdown, because it was like, you want to separate, but you could see it in different competitors, right? Where they would get to that spot where it was starting to hurt real bad, and they would not dig in harder.
Yeah.
They would almost give up, right? Like they would stop at a certain point, or maybe ease up, kind of let their body come up a little bit more where it doesn't hurt as bad. But you could see this play out in real time.
Yeah.
But again, the clock is only, maybe it's 75 seconds, right? Like with the truck pull, because you can't, in all fairness, like, you can't really go that hard, because it's an anaerobic type of deal, right? So you're just all out, full exertion. At that point, like, you can't even hardly grip the rope anymore, and your legs don't want to work. But we're not talking about 24 hours, right? Yes. So like, you're living in a different spot mentally. So it's what's fascinating to me is it's such a drastic difference in how I would approach it mentally to go through that type of suck for that amount of time. And then, maybe, yes, like you're saying, okay, at the end of that, are you throwing up? Maybe. Are you laying on the ground and you can't move? Maybe. Right? Like, but this is what I wanted to live in, right? So like, you're accepting that fate and hoping and just, well, not hoping, it's not hope because you train for it, but it's like you're wanting to execute that and live there, right? Yeah. And then my biggest thing was, all the other guys would take oxygen, all of this, they would have to be helped off or whatever. Like my thing was to be in a spot where I could do it, win it, then not do oxygen, walk around and do my interview afterwards, because mentally for the other competitors I was against, if I could do that, they were like, oh shit, right? Like this guy's like that. I was being carried off, or I was on oxygen and being helped to a chair. And Brian's over here winning the event, doing the interview, celebrating, whatever.
You're like blowing bubbles. You don't
Whatever.
need oxygen.
Well, that would have been a good one. Yeah. But that was where I wanted to go, because mentally I knew that it could crush them. Right. But again, it's about winning, and that was where my mind was going. But you're 24 hours, like it's a different, like where do you go in your mind, right? Because you're saying like everybody's going to have highs and lows within that period, just like you are. I'm sure there's struggles. I'm sure there's points where mentally you're in a different spot. You have to go to a different spot. I think that's what's so fascinating is yeah. And even right now, I'm like trying to imagine, like, how would that be? Like I'm on this line, they're going to say start, and I've got 24 hours in front of me to get this done, right? And it's like, that's wild. Is that,
Yeah.
I mean, do you ever think that's wild? Because that's like,
Absolutely.
it's so hard to comprehend, right?
Yeah.
And I've been in a lot of competitive settings, but it's such a different thing because you have to find a zone. Like I would imagine you'd have to find a zone and like have it planned out to some extent from a strategy standpoint or something, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is that like? I'm so fascinated to know what it is like. What's going through your head?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting when you were telling about the truck pull story. It felt like very similar. Like when you're standing there getting ready, in your head, you're preparing for this battle that's really going to be quite mental. To physically push past where other people stop is a mental game, right? Like you have to be strong physically to do the activity, but also you're staying really strong in your head to turn it a few more notches than anyone else is willing to.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
And that I was like, that's the same thing that we're doing, but over the course of 100 miles. It's like when I first got into the sport, so I did that marathon, finished, wondered what else was out there. Then I tried a 50K, which is 5 more miles than a marathon. I was like, I think I can survive 5 more miles than what I just did, so let's go for it. Finished that, kept wondering, what else is out there, did a 50-mile race, finished it. And up to that point for me, like it felt like running, just normal, like this is, I'm physically getting myself to this finish line. But then I signed up for a 100-mile race, and it was in Steamboat Springs here in Colorado, in the mountains, absolutely beautiful. But I started hurting really bad during it. Like physically, my legs felt like I had never felt before, so painful. It felt impossible to take any more steps forward. And I quit at mile 60 of that first 100-mile attempt.
Okay.
Because I didn't understand the mental piece of it. Like, yes, we're doing a physical activity of running, but actually our brains are so, so powerful in those difficult moments. So where I quit in this 60-mile race was actually really remote. It was out in the middle of these mountains, and the aid station there was like, well, yeah, you can stop here, but you don't have a ride out for a while. Like, you just need to hang out here. And I was like, I'm so done. I can't get myself out of here. So I'll wait at this aid station for, the ride.
Okay. Yeah.
And that waiting period was actually like one of the most pivotal like moments in my ultra running career, because I had a front row seat then to all these runners coming through who were also physically struggling, but somehow kept moving out. They weren't quitting like I did.
Yeah.
They were looking just as in shambles as I was. Yep. Their legs looked like they hurt just as bad, but they were doing something in their heads that was different than what I had done, which I had given up on myself. I had decided it was too hard and I wasn't this person who could do it.
Yep.
And that triggered this whole understanding for me of the mental side of these physically hard things we try to do. Like in those toughest moments, what you tell yourself in your brain and how you activate that piece of yourself is the most important part of all of it. So when I'm standing at the start line of a 100-mile race, I know physically this is, running 100 miles and it's going to get hard, but mentally I need to stay in the fight. I need to keep believing that it's possible to get to this finish line, and I need to keep on like working to push my body to come along for the ride.
What year was that? Where
I quit was 2012.
12. And that was, so you had done a 50-mile race before that?
I had done a 50K and a 50-mile, and then I tried this 100-mile race.
So with the 50-mile race, did you experience any of that, or that was still kind of like not too bad?
I mean, it was super hard. Like getting to that finish line, I don't know how I made it, but it was like I hadn't had to like go into the mental side as much. I couldn't walk normal for like a month after that 50-mile
yeah, I was going to say, that's crazy. Yeah. So, but you were able to do it.
But I was able to get there.
Yeah.
And then I think just thought, okay, 100 miles, like people do this distance.
Sure.
Must be sort of the same. And
it's fascinating. What's fascinating to me is it took that to kind of get you there where, a lot of people, society now, right? Like for a lot of people, if you ask them to do just a 5K, that would be such a daunting distance. And again, I guess it's all relative when you talk about it, but when you got into that at 60 miles, do you remember, like, was it obviously you're physically hurting, but was it the fact that you're like have to go another 40 miles? Was it like, hey, I'm not, that's not there, I don't have that right now? But then like seeing these other people, when you came back from that, right? Because I'm imagining there's probably a lot of internal reflection, like thinking like, okay, is this too much? Am I going to be able to do this? Like, did I bite off more than I can chew? Like these type of thoughts. Like, was there some type of period after that race, right, where you made a conscious decision, like, all right, I can do this? Like, how did that period go for you?
Yeah, so I ended up quitting the race because of how negative the thoughts in my head had gotten. I was just swirling around all of this negativity. What do you think you're doing out here? Like, it was a joke that you signed up and thought you could be this 100-mile
And this is
runner.
What you're saying to yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like trudging my way towards this aid station, basically like throwing up the white flag, what am I doing out here? And then I watched all these people go through, still thinking like, I couldn't do it, but I'm getting to watch them do it. That's cool.
Yep.
But then the next day, like putting the pieces together, I was fired up immediately on like, I want to be the person who can figure it out. Like, I don't know if I can be, but I want to be. So what do I have to do? And then it was like diving headfirst into like, what do people do to train for these things? Like,
sure.
What's the gear? Like, what are steps I could take to get towards being that person who crosses a finish line after 100 miles? And I don't know why I latched onto it. So, it's like all of us latch onto the thing, some random thing in our life, but
it makes complete sense, right? Because when you face adversity and extreme adversity like that, some people will quit. And there's probably a lot of people, in all fairness, there's probably a lot of people that would have got to that 60 miles, quit there, and that would have been their last race ever.
Yeah.
Like they would, in all fairness, right? They would have just walked away and said, I found my breaking point.
Yeah.
Like I broke, I'm done, like I'm walking away. But like for you to immediately start to break down the pieces, right? Like of well, how am I going to figure this out? How can I get better? Like that's what people, and everybody listen to this, it's just like high level competitors. That's where they go in their head, right? This is just the truth, right? Like there's moments for me with basketball, with strongman, when I got into that, like you go to a different level, excuse me. And when you see that next level, it's like, well, maybe I'm not ready for it right now,
Yeah.
but I will be.
Yeah.
I'm going to be.
Yeah.
And then you figure out the pieces, you figure out how to do it a little bit better, maybe a little bit of trial and error, whatever. But the motivation, the fire to get better is there. And so when you're met with that challenge, and this is what is so fascinating in talking to you, because people like to make people understand, because you and I are obviously very physically different.
What?
Right? Well, okay. I mean, I don't, anybody, if you're not listening online,
We have the same size forearms.
you're like, are you kind of like one of those same size forearms? I mean, I fit in the chair better than you do, basically, right? Is that what you're saying? I like it. Gosh, I love the responses. What are you talking about? So it's such a it's fun though, because it's such a drastic difference, right? And you know where you're going in your head to do these things, where I went in my head to do the things I did, but like relating it to people, and I got to see this quite a bit, like through my career, and you know, in basketball, right, in college, like our coach was a very like military minded individual, and he would put the team, like all the guys, through the paces where he would want to find that breaking point, right? And it was kind of the mentality, and I got to see it, but it was like you bonded together as a team because you go through these really hard things, but you get through it and you didn't die. So then you in your head, you're like, you know what? I've been through some really hard stuff here. I can do it. I'm going to find a way. And then you kind of seek out this next challenge, and then you accomplish that. And you're like, okay, what's the next, like, where can I go with this? And it's fascinating. You said one thing earlier here where it's like, I just want to figure out what's possible. Right. And I kind of said the same thing with strongman, because I hated the word impossible. Right. Like, and my training partners knew this. So they would, if they would say that word out of their mouth, that's impossible. And I said, it's not impossible. It just hasn't been done yet. Right. Like, and that was the mentality. I always thought that. It was like, well, you can do more, you can push the bar more. And I like firmly believe that. So like you're saying the same thing with running. It's like, well, what's the next challenge? But meeting the adversity, right? Like you have to go through these things. And I think that, you know, as much as you're training this, discipline is a big part of this as well, right? So you have to train your discipline. It's something like, for me, I think that you need to train your discipline on a daily basis. Like you have to do something hard. So for me, like I really like cold water. I think that's a great way to train discipline, but it's like every single day of my life, I either start with a cold shower, as cold as it'll go, or cold tub, right?
Okay.
Like where I fully submerge cold tub. And I don't want to do it, right? Every single day, that's not something where it's like, okay, yes, freezing cold water. Let me do this. But I make myself start my day that way every single day, because it is something difficult that I do. I force myself to do it, and then I feel better after I do it. But it's like you have to keep that sharp, right? Whereas if I just said, oh, I'm just going to go, you know, warm water first thing, comfortable, everything's comfortable. Like I feel like I'm not getting better. Like I'm not maintaining the discipline that I've tried to build. And you know, you go through periods where you have these challenges, but it's so fascinating to hear like the things that you're saying, and like to normal people that maybe haven't met the challenge or haven't accepted a challenge or whatever. Like you can always do more, but like training mentally after that race where you got challenged, you got to see other people do it, like building up, like how did you modify your approach, your training, become more mentally disciplined? Like did you have anybody, like did you talk to those other runners that finished that race? Like did they give insight, or like how did you take that next step?
Yeah, I was like a sponge. So I picked right after I didn't finish that first attempt, I picked a 100-mile race the following year, 1 year later. And I was like, this is what I'm going to go for. And in this next year, I'm going to just figure out what I need to do to cross that finish line when it gets there. So it was, soaking up knowledge from people who had, done it before or knew more information than me. Like I was going in completely like humbled by the sport and the distance and wanting to learn. So I was really eager. And I mean, people are like such like, there's so much knowledge, you know, if we can all help each other, lift each other up in that way by sharing what we found out. So that was really cool. The whole community was really open with like, you know, here's some tips or tricks or whatever. And then it was just doing it. Like, just if this is the person you want to be, then get out the door and start stacking your blocks, you know, like tiny little Legos at a time. It doesn't matter, but like you've got to put in the work if you want to get there. And the race I had chosen was on a trail, and I lived at the time in downtown Denver. And so I was like, I need to get on actual trail. Like I need to actually figure out how to pick up my feet, not fall everywhere, like train on the stuff that I'm going to do this race on. So it was a lot of intentionality behind that as well. And then making sure, for me, I'm like really driven by fun and joy as well. So it was like, you know, making sure it stayed like I'm doing this because I want to, and I'm having fun with it, but we're working towards this hard goal that like, I don't know if I can be that person, but I'm going to at least do the steps where I can test myself again and see.
Makes sense.
And then when I stood on that start line 1 year later, it was a different race, but 100-mile distance again. In my head, I was just like, you do not give up on this mentally. Like physically, we're prepared that it's going to hurt. It's going to be really hard. 100 miles is far. No one likes to drive 100 miles, let alone do it with their feet.
Yep.
But I was like, mentally, you're staying in the game. Like, believe in yourself, problem solve as problems happen, but don't give up to those negative thoughts, because the last time the negative thoughts had swirled me right around the drain, you know? And I was like, no matter what thought enters my brain, I'm going to switch it to a positive one. And then the mental pieces started clicking of like, during that race, it was so hard. I like cried for a whole 10-mile stretch, you know, like it was physically like really, really hard. But in my brain, I just kept the record really positive. It just kept spinning like, you can do this, you're fine, this is fine, like keep believing, you know? And I don't know, I think that's part of what I love so much about this sport is that discovery of like how important our mindset is in those hard moments and like how it connects to the physical piece of it. And ever since that race, now the mindset for me is a huge part of this sport. Like all my races I do now, it's the same thing. Like we stay positive and we stay strong and believe in our brains that we're going to get there. Even though I've run that 100-mile distance now quite a few times, it physically still is hard. You know, like it's still difficult to get to those finish lines, but the mind game, I think, is just like becoming more and more crucial during it.
I mean, that's very well said. It's like the mind, like the discipline to do that is crazy, right? I mean, it's just staying in that zone. Do you do a lot of visualization leading up to the race, or how does that work? Do you see yourself being successful, how it's going to feel? Like are you able to kind of mentally put yourself in that spot where when you're going into it, does that help you a lot? Like from a mental standpoint?
I think I don't do a ton of visualization of, you know, crossing a finish line or anything like that, which I know, is like a great strategy that a lot of people use. My visualization before a race is more about thinking through the problems that might come up as I'm out there in those 20, 24, 30 hours, whatever it takes, and how I might react to them. So like trying to predict and pre-plan a little bit to the inevitable hiccups along the way.
So what would those be? Like what type of hiccups, like when you say that?
Yeah, so Typical ones in these types of races are, I mean, we're taking in nutrition the whole time. Got to keep the gas tank full. So sometimes your nutrition just doesn't work like you planned it to. Or,
so what do you eat? What, I mean, like because you have to pack it with you, right?
Yeah, and it's at the aid stations too, so you can reload.
Okay.
I keep it really simple during the races. I drink quite a few of my calories with Tailwind Nutrition. And then I'll do like classic gels and the little like
so like the little packs where you
chews.
just rip the top off. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's kind of boring. At the aid stations though, they'll have everything. Like it's a buffet spread of, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, quesadillas, soup, coffee, sodas, candies, chips. Like,
I mean, is that good? Would you want to like have a quesadilla and then run it? Do people like that? I mean, they must, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of methods to the madness in this sport, and so.
But that's not really your thing. You like to more drink and like it sounds like gels or chews.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I keep it pretty streamlined, but the buffet tables always look the best.
I would imagine. I mean, so the nutrition is one component. What else could go wrong? I mean, do your shoes last 100 miles?
Yeah, shoes last 100 miles. But yeah, you might have some gear issues or, we're wearing these packs. And so, maybe you have something with that. That's a problem. So the courses are usually marked with little ribbons or flags along the way, but there's often other trails on the same network. And so maybe you get lost or miss one of the flags and end up off course is a pretty common hiccup that could happen.
Okay.
Or it's just like...
Well, it's pretty hard to memorize 100-mile court, right? Like,
yeah.
Okay. So if you get off, you have to find your way back.
Yeah.
Right? Or something. Okay.
Yeah, and you would find out you're off course by not seeing flags anymore. You don't see the ribbons.
So would you backtrack?
Then you backtrack, yeah.
Wow, okay.
So
gosh, that would be a little demoralizing.
Yeah.
Like you're making your way down. And then when do you realize you're off course? That would be a tough one for sure.
I mean, it's people sometimes add on like 6 miles or 8, like
wow.
It can be a big chunk if you didn't pay attention. We're also going through the night for these races. So you put on a headlamp and you keep going. Like the clock is still running.
Sure.
We're not stopping to sleep usually. So
it's 24 hours, no sleep.
No sleep. And 24 hours is just like a kind of typical time it might take to finish a 100-mile course.
Okay.
But depending on the course.
I mean, is that your time or is that a typical time?
It depends on the course.
Okay.
Like some courses
because I'm not finishing 100 miles in 24. You know what I'm saying? Like that's.
Yeah. That's just like throwing out a time that's like kind of a common.
Is that, I mean, that would be a very respectable time. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Super great.
So what does that break down to per mile then?
That would be like 4 miles an hour.
So you're running 15-minute miles.
But
for 100 miles.
But that would
average.
Be like, I mean, some courses are in the mountains, so you're climbing a ton.
So some are slower.
Some are slower, or some sections are way slower because you're,
that's insane.
Hiking up a huge mountain and then you run down, so your pace varies quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then some courses are really fast. They're like flatter, smoother trails, maybe out in the desert or something. And people do like 12 hours for 100 miles on courses like that, like ripping super fast.
That's wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. Like the magnitude of that, like to maintain that type of pace, like it's just, I mean, that's phenomenal. That's crazy.
People always ask what pace do you run these hundreds in? And I'm like, I can't answer that actually because the terrain dictates the pace. If you're, your chunk in front of you is 100 miles, you're trying to hold the best output, the best effort on that 100-mile distance to make it to the finish line. So it's like, if it's a really big climb, maybe your best output for what you have left on the course still is to hike it.
Sure.
Do some fast hiking up this hill instead of trying to, pound up running. So you have to just kind of roll with the terrain for your pace and
Yeah.
take what it gives you.
I mean, it completely makes sense. It's not like you're going around a track, right? Like it's all of these variables are coming into play. So it's, I mean, it's again, it's adversity in all of these scenarios, like in overcoming that,
Yeah.
and then working through it. Like it's just crazy. Like what is your favorite type of race? Like, is there a favorite race that you can remember? Maybe we could pull something up and look at it. Like,
man, there's so many good ones. So before we switch to that, there are 100-mile races or 24-hour races on tracks. So you could just do laps on a 400-meter track for 24 hours is a very common format in this sport.
Have you done that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you, I'm assuming you don't like that as much as the trail ones.
I just love the feeling on the trails of, like, oftentimes you reach these cool summits or come around a corner and you don't know what you're going to see.
Sure.
Like it feels a little like exploration and adventure.
Yeah.
Which adds to it for me. So right now I'm really loving the trail races, but the track races, for example, you're not physically exploring any scenery, but you're mentally exploring a lot. Like,
I can imagine.
You're all up in your brain for those 24 hours.
So like, what is this? We pulled up a video.
So that one's Leadville. This is looks like a Solomon TV episode called A Team Sport.
Okay.
And this was about my
and
summer.
This is your husband?
That's my husband.
Awesome. Does he run too?
He does now.
Does he?
Yeah.
You got him into it. Awesome.
Yeah, now he's done a couple 100-mile races.
Has he?
Yeah.
Wow.
But when we first met, he wasn't really into running. So this film follows along with my 2023 summer.
Okay.
Where I did 300-mile races in the course of a couple months to try and like recover really well after race again.
Because you said
really
normally
well.
it takes a while to recover.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was pretty cool. There was one out in California called Western States. That's usually like faster and hotter.
Okay.
That kicked off the summer. And then I did the second one in Colorado. It's called Hard Rock 100. And that's in the San Juan Mountains. In the 100 miles, it climbs like 30-some thousand feet of gain. So you're like just immersed fully in the mountains.
100%. Wow, that is a lot of elevation.
Yeah. And it's all really at altitude too.
Sure.
And then the summer ended with one in Europe called UTMB, Ultra Trail Mont Blanc, which is one of the biggest trail ultras that we have in the world right now. But you go around Mont Blanc, which is a really big mountain there, and it's this really beautiful mountainous course. But the trail running in Europe is like fans come out, and it's like
that's cool.
Getting that scene of like people cheering along the course and kind of like Tour de France style.
Does that give you a little boost? I would imagine.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's fun to have all that energy. Like you probably feed off of the energy of people.
Big time.
Yeah.
Yep.
It helps.
I mean, if you have a crowd that's like super into it,
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
And I can imagine on a course like that, if you have some type of people cheering you on, I mean, that would just be like, oh, this is really, really neat.
Yeah.
Just like a little bit of boost, you know?
Even if it's just for a minute, it's like, okay, we've got some good energy now. I'm feeling it. And now I'll head out into this remote mountain section again by myself.
Sure. Yeah. It's such an interesting thing. I mean, so do you train with your husband? Like now that he's got into it, do you guys get to train together, or is that not like you prefer? How does that go?
Yeah. I'll do most of my training by myself, but then we run together.
Got it.
And,
okay.
I'll join him for his runs after his work day or whatever. But it's been
when you say training, what does training entail?
A lot of long runs.
How would you, like, if somebody's listening, like, and I'm actually fascinated too, like what does your training routine look like to get to that type of distance?
Oh my gosh, I can't wait for you to sign up for a 50K.
For me?
Yeah. Let's do it.
50K. Okay, let's pump the brakes just a little bit. Maybe 5. Like without the zero, like at the end, you know?
Well, we can start there. You got to start somewhere.
I can see why your husband is being forced into this. A 50K is what we start with. Okay. Okay. I mean, I don't even know how to respond to that. That's good. That's good.
I think training for it, like you can hire coaches and there's training programs that people sign up for these distances. And it's a lot like marathon training where you're just trying to build up your body's ability to do these distances and recover and like feel good. So it for sure isn't like, oh, I'm going to do a 50K. So tomorrow I probably need to run 50K, you know?
Sure.
It's
you
like,
build. Yeah.
yeah, if you're starting at, 3 miles, that's a perfect starting point. You've got the 3 mile base built, and then slowly you add in a little bit and, figure out like the gear and the nutrition, I think are kind of the bigger pieces that in addition to running the distance, you've got to like figure out what your stomach will take while you're running.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, is there anything else besides running? I mean, do you do any type of other strength stuff or stretching or like rehab type of stuff, like any type of soft tissue work? Do you do any of that? I would imagine you get some type of overuse type of stuff going on,
Yeah.
That you have to kind of manage as you're going along.
Yeah. I had to learn that lesson the hard way. I didn't used to do any of that. And then I had an injury from overuse.
Okay.
And then started implementing. I got to work with this really fantastic team that helped me realize that if I want to ask my body to do so much, I needed to, give it something back once in a while.
Completely fair. Yeah.
So now I do like core routine, and glutes are huge for running, like keeping that, trunk really solid as the distance gets longer is really helpful. So I'll do basic like hip and glute stuff.
Okay.
Not very much in the arms, which probably is a surprise to you.
I mean, well, it's with how big you are,
yeah.
It's like insane that just is there. It's crazy. I'm jealous,
That's
really.
just natural.
Yeah. It's just it's just living your life just like that. That's good. That's very good. Yeah.
Yeah, but just some basic strength stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, mostly focused on that trunk piece to like hold everything upright. I remember some of my first years of doing these races. By the end of them, it felt like gravity was too heavy. Like just holding myself upright felt impossible.
Well, I mean, it's just, how many foot strikes would you have? I mean, it's just like, it's insane to comprehend like that type of volume, right? Like it's just so much volume. And again, it's like most people, if you ask somebody to stand up for 24 hours, you don't get to sit down, just stand up or even walk for that amount of time.
That'd be hard.
Very hard. Yeah. So, I mean, to do it where you're running at a very good pace, like it's just the workload is insane. I mean, it's just insane to think about. Like if you really try to break it down, it's one thing to talk about it, but it's a whole different thing. Like as you get into it, to maintain that for that amount of time is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's easy, I think, for all of us to never look back and see where we came from, like always be in the place we are and think like how far we are from where we want to be. But if you look back for a minute and be like, man, I started out like 3 miles was hard, you know, and then was able to, slowly grow that to this new distance that is hard for me right now. But like, that's pretty cool if you take a minute to look back. Like you weren't always pulling a truck, No,
of course. Yeah.
And it's like, we forget sometimes to, appreciate how far we've come from that beginning place and all the work it took to get there.
Yeah.
As we're always like eyes forward on, like, well, that's the place I really want to be, Well,
I mean, you kind of, hit the nail on the head with that because it's there's always a starting point. Right?
Yeah.
Like you go back and, for anybody, there's no matter what you're doing, right? Like you're growing in some way, shape, or form. As you know, shouldn't really be the same person you were when you were growing up or in high school or college or whatever. Like as you get into your life, you kind of are evolving and changing and doing all of these different things, right? So there's always a starting point, you know, and it's I'm sure there's probably people that are like, oh, you know, and people got this way with me too with strongman. It must be nice, like you just go do that, like you're at this level, whatever. But it's like, I didn't start at that level.
Yeah.
You didn't start at the level you're at, and you had to work incredibly hard to get to where you are. So now you're challenging yourself in a different way. But somebody coming into it, again, if they were to want to do a race, it's probably going to, like a 5K for a lot of people is like, you know, 3.2 miles is a lot of like distance to cover,
Yeah.
especially if you haven't done it. So there's a starting point, and then you kind of build up in these different levels, and then, you know, figure out different ways to push yourself and challenge yourself. And, you know, it's interesting, you know, as you grow, right? Like I think it's these different challenges, but I'm feeling like you very much have just continued to challenge yourself to figure out what's possible and what is possible for you.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, you know, I'm asking that question about, okay, well, are you at the starting line saying I'm going to win this? But now, like, you're kind of in your own, like your own level now, right? Like you're like what I would assume a lot of runners look up to, right? Where they're like, okay, well, you're at the level you're at, and you're doing the things you're doing. So now you're kind of that expert that somebody that maybe had been at the spot where you were when you quit that race at 60 miles, like you can offer the insight, you can offer the advice, and, you know, say like, hey, you can do this.
Yeah.
I was once in your shoes, right? Like that's what got to be pretty cool, because then you kind of come like full circle back in, you know, back into the sport where you're helping others, you know, kind of pave their path too.
Yeah, 100%. And it feels like, man, if I can create a, you know, springboard just of like experience and information to help someone bypass, you know, like
Yes.
a few of the steps along the way that I took that weren't useful steps, you know, it's like, or a ladder. Like my hope is that people keep coming along and like blowing our minds with, you know, raising the bar
Yeah.
in every avenue, like all aspects of life. That would be cool. And like the one I'm trying to, you know, just like put a ladder rung in right now is ultra running.
Yeah.
Just like you're doing for strongman. Like, would you say you're hoping that your name is just one of, you know, the many who helped people get where they eventually get in like 20 years?
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to, you know, and I've said this quite a bit, is I wanted to make the sport better, right? Like I wanted to raise the bar, you know, and be that, you know, for a lot of people, and come in and be more, you know, more professional, excuse me. And just, and be that, right? Like you're setting the standard, you know, for your career, right? Like as you do it, and then, you know, you leave it in a better spot than you found it, right? Like, and I think that was kind of my mindset with it. But yeah, it's I think that it's fun to talk about, right? And you know, kind of go through. So one thing I do want to ask you about is, I want you to talk about the pain cave. Because in some of the research, it's like it came up, like what is the pain cave? I don't know. Like we talked about, okay, the mental spot that you get into and how you go through this and how you approach it. But for you, tell me about that.
Yeah. So the pain cave, people have probably heard the term before. It's pretty commonly used in a lot of sports. There's also like the Hurt Locker, Struggle Bus, Sufferfest, Pain Cave. Like they're all kind of the same thing.
Okay.
To me. And for some reason, like the Pain Cave, like I could create this cave in my head and I could see it. And so that's the term I latched onto. And when I started doing these ultra races, the Pain Cave was the place I never wanted to arrive at. And that was, the Pain Cave for me was like that moment when it's physically really, really hard and you don't know if you can keep going. Like that's that Pain Cave feeling. And so I associated the pain cave with negativity always. Like, don't arrive to the pain cave. If you arrive at the pain cave, like, just try to ride it out, like survive those moments, you know?
Yep.
But over the years I realized, like, okay, so this place, like, it's a thing that happens during these races. It physically becomes really, really hard. But then if mentally I'm going to this place that's negative, how is that serving me in getting to the finish line? It's not really. So what if I change the story about this cave? And now the story for the pain cave for me is that I want to go there because that's where I actually get to do the work to get better. So when I'm in a race and it physically feels like, oh, I can't do another step, I can't hold this effort, I can't push as hard, I go to this cave in my brain. I can actually see it during the race, like it's an image that I have. And I celebrate, like, sweet, we made it here, because you don't get to the cave very often. You know, you have to be doing something special to arrive there. And now let's do the work to be better for the next time. So the work I do in there is like chiseling away at the cave to make it bigger. And that to me makes those moments of difficulty and of pushing through the suffer feel productive. Like, stay in this, you know, suffer a little bit more, a little bit longer, but you're making the cave bigger. So next time when you go in, it will be more ready for you and you'll be able to be even better in there.
Interesting. So it's a place that you go that you can see, that you will work inside.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's all just a story in my head, but like having that storyline when it's physically really hard, that storyline and that mentality helped me a ton in just holding the effort, you know, like, do the work, keep doing the work with your brain right now, and your feet will follow suit,
sure,
hopefully. And then what you're doing is expanding your capacity to hold that for the next time. So if, like, the first times I was in the pain cave, maybe I, you know, could be in there for 20 minutes, and then it was like, that's all the amount I could push into it. And now it's like expanded out where I could stay in there for hours if I need to, and just keep on making that space bigger in my brain for those moments.
So you almost got comfortable there.
Yeah, 100%. It was all about getting comfortable in the hard moments and celebrating the hard moments, which for me was a really helpful mindset switch of like, these hard moments are actually what I'm looking for. Like, I'm signing up for these races so that I can experience this hard thing and see if I can, you know, do it.
Makes sense.
You know?
Yeah. So is there a, now for you, is there a duration of a race where you're going to hit the pain cave and you know you are? Or is it like, hey, now some 100-mile races, I don't even have to go there?
Yeah. And I think my wording for it would be different, where like, if I don't go there, I feel a little disappointed.
Okay.
Like, I did this 100-mile race. I had the opportunity to go to my pain cave and try to be better because of it.
Okay.
And I didn't get there. So next time I need to, you know, maybe push a little harder or figure out how I can get to that moment where I'm getting that chance to be a better version of myself. You know, so like, I want to go.
Fascinating. That's seriously fascinating. It's like,
or crazy.
Crazy. But I'm with you. I like that world that you're talking about, because it's like, you finish this, but you could have made it more difficult potentially to get into that cave to get better. So you're getting better by getting in there, but you need to go to that difficulty level to enter so that you're in there. It's not a place you get without getting to extreme difficulty.
Yeah.
Right. So like you're using the analogy of chiseling in there, working in there, but by working in there, you're getting better.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I like that a lot.
Yeah. It's just helped me a lot. I think a lot of things we do in life are mental, like our mentality about stuff, our attitude. And so this mental imagery and this storyline for me like resonated a lot, and I could, hold on to it, and it felt like, okay, I can, have actions follow this mentality.
Sure.
But it could be, anything. Like it doesn't have to be a cave for somebody.
Sure.
It's like what's the story, what's the imagery, what's the thing that helps you in those tough moments. Just stay in it, because staying in the tough moment can make you better.
Yep. Well, it will make you better for sure. Right. And I think it's, for everybody out there, it's figuring out what challenge, where do you need to challenge yourself? Right. And it's kind of, one of these things I've talked about with people is like, I think for me personally, just training, right. And not necessarily competing, but just training. So actively training. So going in, working out. Like, I think that's something that everybody should do. Like every single person should do in some capacity, way, shape, or form, right? Because it teaches you so much about yourself. You get to experience, challenge. You have to overcome some adversity, right? Like it makes you become a better version of yourself, right? Through training, but also through the mental discipline that has to be built. And then, typically, people will go in and do that. And the stimulus that's hard at the beginning, after weeks or months or years, that stimulus now needs to be more, right?
Yeah.
Like in order to get to that level of adversity, because when you walk in there on the very first day, for example, the bar itself might be heavy, and
I
so
completely agree.
Well, with the size of your arms, I don't know why you would ever say that, but you know what I'm saying though. It's like you walk in, or the smallest pair of dumbbells, right? Like we walked into my gym before we came in here, and we were looking at the old York dumbbells, and there's like the salesman sample that's like super tiny, right? Like the tiniest pair of dumbbells you've ever seen, but they were just a sample. Like not that would ever be heavy.
I
but
thought you had special ordered those for me.
just to set them up.
Yeah.
See, that would have been even better. The chairs, the dumbbells, all of it. But it's like, it's relative speaking, because if you look at that rack of dumbbells, right? Somebody like somewhere the first pair of dumbbells, maybe not those, but like the 1 pound dumbbells, right?
Yeah.
If you use it, that rack goes from 1 pound dumbbells up to 100-pound dumbbells, right? And eventually you start with the 1s or the 5s or the 10s or the 20s, whatever. And then you build your way up. And eventually, like depending on the exercise, the 100s may not be enough. And then you go on, you graduate from that rack to the next rack. And you could use this analogy for people with running distances, with weights, with, whatever. With anything.
Yeah.
Truly. And you become better, but it's through that stimulus, right, that you're introducing into your life so that you become better. But, so many people that never challenge themselves, they don't get to experience that. It's such a sad thing, because like your life in general can improve through basically seeking out and doing hard things and just becoming a better version of yourself. Right. And so that's like the main thing that I try to, get across to people, because it's such a beneficial thing. Right. And it's not that you necessarily have to take it to an extreme in whatever you're doing. It doesn't have to necessarily be that. For some people, that's what it is. Right. It's like you get into it and like, all right, I want more. I want to challenge myself more. And that happens over time. Right. Because and I don't know, maybe like the first time that you set out to do a marathon, did you envision yourself running a 100-mile race or more?
No, absolutely not.
But that stimulus, and then you question, like, can I do more?
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, you don't know until you get into it. But now this version of yourself is such a different version, I would imagine, than where you started. Right. Like in what you're talking about right now with, the mental discipline and just just your capacity for work, like, has been developed over a long time. right?
Yeah.
It's not just like you started last week and you're coming in and talking about all this stuff right now. Like there's a lot of knowledge that you're sharing that has to be developed over a long period of time. And there's no other way to do it besides putting the work in and making it happen.
Just one little bit at a time. Yeah. And it's like, I don't think everyone needs to be a person who decides to run 100 miles, you know?
Yeah.
But if I think back to that person who signed up for that road marathon, I honestly thought it would kill me. Like, I texted goodbye to my family and friends that morning. Like,
wow.
I'm doing this marathon. Like, see ya.
Sure.
Basically,
if I come back,
I'm going to be a sack of skin on the side of the road, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, like, what I've realized over the years is that my bar for what I thought I was capable of was too low. And in general, probably all of our bars for, we set for ourselves are a little too low, and we should raise them up a couple notches and then just see, because you might miss the bar the first couple of times, or you might never even reach that bar, but like, wasn't it cool to try?
Yep.
Like, the trying part is actually the meat of the story.
Yes.
Getting the thing is the tiniest little blip, but like going after something that sounds too hard took you years or months or whatever it took. Like, that's the story. That was like, how cool was the life experiences that you got out of just trying?
The journey, for sure. The journey. Yeah. It's such a, such a true thing. And to a lot of people that may not make sense, right? Like you're evolving through that journey. And I would, again, like with strongman in general, it's like everybody looks at the contest, right? Everybody pays attention to the contest and the results and what happened there. But, the contest is such a quick, it really happens quick, right? You have this build up over weeks and months and potentially years, into that one contest. And then you look at the result of that, which I'm not saying the result is not important, because it very much is. But like, as you get deeper into, for me, I don't think I realized it toward the beginning of my career. It was more toward the later part of my career, where it's like the beauty really is in the journey, right? So like the training and, the things that you have to go through to get there.
Yeah.
Right. So your back's against the wall. You have this date coming up. You have to get ready. You have to do these things to get ready. And you have good days in there. You have bad days, everything in between. And through all of that, you're growing, you're preparing, all of this. But then when you look back, it's like, well, I really actually enjoyed the journey, the process to get there, the challenge, the struggle, everything that goes along with it to get to that point.
Yeah.
And most people would look at it and say, well, this contest result, that's what was the end. Okay, cool. But what did it take to get there?
Yeah.
Right. So like, it's, and I'm sure with you, it's like, well, the race happens, but what did you have to do in the, weeks and months and years to get to that point to be able to execute in that manner? And that's the journey, like where you've evolved and you've grown, through all of it, which is so cool, to experience, because you're a different person in a lot of ways, but you're also a better version of yourself because you challenge yourself in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's really cool. Like if you think about it, it's like, it's such a thing, like, to get across to people. Just take the first step, right? So like, a race of that distance starts with one step.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and it's a neat way to kind of think of it, where you're breaking it down into small parts. But again, like you use the analogy of, like kind of like stacking. And I like that too. Stacking bricks. Something I used to say a lot with my training was like, hey, today you may not stack the biggest brick, but you're stacking something.
Yeah.
So you're getting better, but it's a combination of all of that, which is so cool.
Some days it could be a grain of sand.
That's it.
But it'll add up if you just keep adding. Yeah.
So with all of the training, what's the longest race you've ever done?
The longest race I've ever done is...
Like, does it stop at 100 miles?
No, there's races that are 200 miles. The longest one I ever did was 280 some miles.
280 some miles.
Yeah. This was actually, it's kind of a wacky format within the sport that's already kind of wacky. So
Okay.
buckle up, but
Yeah, yeah. I don't even, 208. That's crazy.
yeah, so that was at a race that's called a backyard format race. So
Okay.
the backyard style ultras are where there is no finish line, but you're running a 4-mile loop every hour on the hour.
Okay.
And you're staying in it until you're the last person standing. So,
Wow.
like the ways you get out of a last man standing or this backyard format race is if you just refuse to do another lap or if you miss the time cut. So like you didn't make the 4-mile loop within the hour.
So you do the 4 miles and then you rest until.
Yep.
Okay.
Do the 4 miles and then with whatever time you have left over, so maybe you have 10 minutes left over.
Okay.
Then you wait and you can eat food, you could change clothes,
Interesting.
you could do body maintenance, whatever. But then at the top of the hour, they blow a whistle and you have to be running on the next lap to stay in the race.
Interesting.
4-mile loop, do it all again. And it just goes until there's only one person who's willing to do another lap.
Wow.
It's wild. So my 283 was, or whatever it was quite a few years ago. And since then I haven't been back to a backyard race lately, but the record for how far it's gone, I think was over 4 days of doing a 4-mile loop every single hour. So if you're sleeping during those 4 days, it's only in that tiny window of time between
Your break time.
when you have to start the next loop. Because you
What?
can't start the loop late. You have to start it on the whistle.
That's insane.
Yeah, absolutely wild. So people have stayed awake basically for these 4 days to do the 4-mile loop every single hour on the hour.
So did you like that one when you went 280 something miles? Was that enough to win that one?
That year it was.
Okay.
Yeah. And in the race format, if you're the last one standing, you only get to do one more loop and then you're done. So
Okay.
the race is called then, which makes it kind of interesting because it makes the potential for the winner rely on the potential for the other people in the race as well.
Sure.
You know, like you need another person who's
To stay with you.
willing to go the distance with you.
Interesting.
Which makes it this really interesting, almost like team vibe out there.
Yeah.
Like you need that good momentum. You need people to stay in because the whole premise of the format is like, how far can we go? Can we make it to 3 days? Can we make it to 4 days? Like, what does it look like? But I need friends to go with me.
Makes
you
sense.
know?
Yeah.
So
Stay
you're
with-
not at all like trying to be this competitor then. You're trying to like, hey, how can I help you in this tough moment?
Sure.
So that we can both keep on finding out what we're capable of in this race today.
That's nuts.
It's really crazy.
I mean, the format of that is like crazy. So you'd have to maintain it at least a 15-minute mile
Yeah, and
minimum.
because squeaking in right before the whistle.
Then you go right into it again.
Yeah, you have no time to do
So
anything.
what would your ideal lap be?
I think
like
I was doing like maybe 52s.
Okay.
Felt like not a ton of impact on my body. Felt like okay to maintain that pace. But then the 8 minutes felt good to, just get all problems taken care of and food eaten and whatever.
Okay.
But
That's
it's wild.
So 8 minute break, 52 run.
Yeah.
And then and maintain that
And
for
just-
just days.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's such a different, it's so fun for me to listen to you talk about that because it's like, well, where would you go in your head? Because there is no stop point.
Yeah. If you try to project to a finish line,
Yeah.
I think it's actually makes it really hard because you're looking around you, and it's
Yep.
like, I don't know what they're actually feeling or how anyone's doing.
Yeah.
So I don't know when this thing will end. It could go on for 2 more hours or 2 more days.
Yeah. So
And
you're
you-
just ready for whatever.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I'm not an expert in the format or anything really, but I think the the best move is just to stay in the moment, not
I would imagine.
not project ahead, not be like ruminating on what happened before. It's like, just do this hour.
Yep.
I think
yeah.
one of the coolest parts is that in that particular format, people surprise themselves so much with what they're capable of.
Yep.
Like, I remember one of the first years I did one of those types of races, I was running with a person on the loop, and they said, I'm hoping today to cover my first marathon distance. They had never run a marathon, and they were hoping at this backyard race, this last person standing race, they could make it to enough laps to hit a marathon. At the end of it, when they decided to stop, finally, when they didn't do another lap, they were over 70 miles.
Wow.
And their goal at the start had been a
Just
marathon.
26. Yeah, so I mean, they really exceeded
But
what
it
they
was
were going
like
to do. Yeah.
every hour, when faced with this like small thing, like, can you do one more lap?
Yeah.
And every hour they just kept saying, yeah, I could do one more.
Yeah.
Like, I'll do that loop one more time. I can digest 1 hour in my brain.
Yep.
And then they do it. And then you get around to the finish again, and it's like, I can digest one more,
So just take it in that increment.
Yeah. And that makes it a pretty cool format. Like, I never would have predicted I could last 280 whatever miles, but it was like addressing each hour at a time. Can I go one more hour? Like, could I make that loop? Let's try.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're like on day 3 and
And you're still running. Yeah. Yeah.
you don't know which way's up, but you're still doing
Sure.
loops.
It's such a, yeah. I mean, you like, as you go into training or exercise, right? Like, if you're in it, it's like how mentally, where do you go for that compared to when you have a finish line,
Yeah.
be it 100 miles or whatever the finish line is, that's the completion point. So you're working towards that without stopping,
Yeah.
or very minimal stopping. Like, it's such a fascinating thing, like where the mental side of this is,
Yeah.
like as you get into it. Cause that's, again, it would be like, somebody else coming along with you. Okay, well, how are they feeling? And like, are they going to do another one or not? Like at that race in particular, did it get down to just 2 of you?
Yeah. For a
And
really long time.
So it's just 2 of you pushing each other, basically.
Yeah. And it was just like, part of you hoping they stay in and part of you hoping they stop so that the suffering can end.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was like, but also please just stay in because we're so far already.
Let's just keep pushing each other.
I want to know what's possible for both of us,
Yeah, yeah.
What would be a strongman version of that? Like, every hour, everyone has to do something.
We used to, the best thing that I could relate to is like, if you had a training group, right? Like of multiple people, you would have to do something, like for example, like we used to use a sandbag quite a bit over a bar. So you would do that, and then you'd get in a rotation.
Okay.
Where when it's your turn, and sometimes we would put a clock on it, so you had to do it within a certain amount of time. And then once you could not do that, you were then out.
Okay.
And then you would kind of eliminate that way.
Yeah.
And then it would eventually get down to 2, where it's just kind of like a back and forth. And you just go until you can't.
So that's
right?
the same idea.
Yes, but not for 3 days, because
But
you're
I
just.
I bet everyone in that surprises themselves too.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way, but then you're under the bar and it's like, I could do it.
Yeah, I did like that. We used to use a kettlebell too.
Okay.
So we'd do the same type of format. It was basically it was a race to 100 kettlebell swings with that kettlebell back then was like 106 pounds, right? So but you had to get the kettlebell, the swing had to go up to your eye level, so you couldn't half swing. And then we would just be in a line. And so one person would go, and then the first round you would get a lot more, like if you could hit 40, for example, or something like that.
Wow.
And then you would be tired, but you'd go to the back of the line, and then your break is only what it takes the other guys to do their reps, and then you're back at it, right? And then eventually, some people would get down to where they could only do a few, right? Because you're just like shot.
Yeah.
And then you're you're going back at it. But then what would always happen with my group when we were at our best was you wouldn't stop at 100. You would just keep going.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, if you're going to keep going, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
Right. And then it was like this competitive thing. And I don't know how many we made it up to, a lot, like, but it would just keep going.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, if you're going to go, I'm going to go. Right. I'm not going to stop. And then you're to the point where you basically can't walk at all. You're falling over, like, cause you're at that point, like your glutes and hamstrings and like everything is just shot because you've done so many of these. So we would, but that was, again, it was a mental training type of thing where you're in this very difficult spot, but you're in it with other people. So you're kind of wanting them to stop. So that, again, like that same phenomenon, right? Like you want them to stop, you know, I'm also like, I loved that when they would push harder because it made me go harder, you know, because there was no way I was going to stop. And they kind of knew that too, right? Like, but they'd push and, you know, all of us collectively are getting better because you're in that challenge. So it's like the same thing, but, you know, kettlebells for days, you know, swings for days would not, like, it's, you know what I'm saying?
I mean,
but
that's the same idea though.
It is.
That's really cool.
On a much smaller scale.
And it's the whole, like, you know, rising tide and metal sharpens, iron sharpens iron, whatever.
For sure.
You know, it's like we're better because of the people around us and the teams that help us do the things we do. And it's like, all of it together is key.
Yes, we are out of time because it just was so fun to talk about. But I really appreciate your, like, seriously, like it's fascinating and what you do. What's coming up? Tell me what's coming up. Like, what's your next goal for this year? Like for 2025, do you have any big ones coming up?
Yeah, I've got a pretty exciting race schedule, but the one coming up is at the start of May, and it's a 250-mile race in Arizona called Cocodona 250.
Okay. Have you done that one before?
I have not, no.
Wow, 250. So do you even mess with a 100-mile race anymore, or is that like, that's not enough?
No, I do still. I love the 100-mile distance.
Those are more like your, like, entry level stuff.
No, it's all still really hard.
Just for impact, 250 miles. And you say that so casually. That's what I think is so disturbing. Is it's just like, yeah, I got a 250 coming up, no problem. Like, whatever. It's wild.
I mean, it's going to be really hard. Like,
I think I would imagine. Yeah, that's probably a pain cave race, right?
Oh, I hope so.
Okay.
I hope to spend a lot of time in the cave there.
I love that. So is that the main one, or you have another bigger one?
And then later in the summer, I'll do that one in Europe called UTMB.
Okay.
Which is the 100-mile race around Mont Blanc.
And that's all like elevation and trail.
Yeah, that's a lot of mountain terrain.
That's crazy. Well, I wish you all the best with it. Seriously. Well, like, if people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
Probably best bet is just on Instagram.
Okay,
Courtney
what is that?
Dauwalter.
Perfect. Well, we can tag that, and, like, man, keep up the awesome work. Like, I think
you too.
Yeah, I think that this is gonna, for people that listen to this, I think, like, you can find a lot of value in the messaging, right? Like, if you listen to it and like try to, like, look in the mirror yourself, think about how that could impact you, because just becoming a better version of yourself is the goal, right? Like, and I think that's the takeaway. Like, I know that I'm motivated right now, and I'm very excited, if you can't tell, about all the stuff we're talking about, because this is stuff that I just latch on to and get excited about. So I really appreciate your time, and we're going to let you get out of here so you can get to your day and your appointments and everything else you got going on.
Thank you so much.
100%. So if you guys enjoyed that, please share the podcast. It helps us out a ton and gets it out to more people. And, hopefully you got a lot of value out of that, because I know I certainly did. But hope you're all doing amazing. For now, go out and be great, and we'll check you guys later. If you enjoyed this podcast episode and would like to listen to another, click right here. And to stay informed about new podcast episodes, click here to subscribe.